Let's go ahead and get started with personal injury marketing. And so what we're going to do is follow the patient. Okay. And what are the basics we need to know? Where do we need to go? What's the content we need to do? We're going to just follow the patient. Okay. This is all called reverse engineering. We don't make stuff up. We just find out what patients are actually doing. And we're going to focus on personal injury patients. What are they actually doing? Then we're going to reverse engineer it, and then that's where we go. And by the way, that's how real marketing's done. So let's go ahead and into that. And so you go, okay, what happens when a patient gets in an accident? Let's just go through the tick line. What's the first thing they'll typically do? They'll call their family member. It's typically what they'll do. This is somebody who's not going to the hospital. They'll typically get, and remember, 85% of the patients don't go to the hospital. Remember, 80% of them are under 20 miles an hour. So there's this huge market. Okay. So what's typically, you're in an accident. What's the first thing you're going to typically do? You're going to call your wife, tell her you're in an accident, tell her you're okay, blah, blah, blah. It's typically the first thing. What's the next thing you're going to do? You're going to call your insurance company, let them know you're in an accident. Okay. Now we're going to come back to that in a second, because that is a very high potential, rich source of new personal injury patients, but it is a totally different animal. What the insurance company wants versus what the attorney wants are 180 degrees opposite. They don't want a big bill. They want everything tight. They don't want an attorney, and they don't want a big bill. But the good news is, and we'll go into this when I actually go into the insurance company itself, because remember, that's the largest source of PI patients. That's the first place they go. Okay. Nobody ever thinks of it. Well, if you're willing to work with the insurance company, meaning you're willing to give them what they want, well, all we do is we educate them that the care is based on the science of the 3 phases of healing. It's based on their biomarkers, and that's it. So that's all it takes. Now I'm cutting to the short version, but that's what it takes. And they'll appreciate it, because they don't want an attorney and they don't want a big ass bill. So if you can legitimately show them what the bill is based on, in other words, it's based on the science of 3 phases of healing, the patient's biomarkers, and you're going to hold the bill down, you're not going to inflate it, you're going to be a source of referrals is what you're going to be. Okay. But that's not the mentality of most chiropractors. It's usually 100 degrees, and 180 degrees the opposite. It's having a big bill to support the attorney's potential injury award. Okay, so they're two totally different animals here. But you can still make good income. You can still make real good income basing your care on the science of the 3 phases of healing and not blowing the bill out. Okay, so all right, having said that, so insurance company, so what happens next? You don't go to the emergency room. So what happens next? You go home. And then what's the typical low impact patient? They'll go to their local GP. Now they'll go to, some of them will go to, that don't have a GP, they'll go to the immediate care center. Now we're going to talk about that separately also, because that is a good potential source of new patients also. But it's a totally different dynamic than an attorney, because it's not a forced market. It will take educational sales. Advertising will not do it. So it will take educational sales, and there will have to be a pleasure pain motive. And it's all about the pain motive. So we'll go into the marketing of the immediate care center facilities and the doctors also. Okay. And then also remember, there's a small percent that actually went to the emergency room. So talking to the emergency room doctors. Okay. And I did that. I would go to the emergency room doctors and give the presentation, but all of them are different messages because their motives are different. The emergency room doctor's motive is different than the medical immediate care center motive versus the GP motive. They all have different motives. So you got to know what their motives are, and you have to speak to their motives. Okay, so we'll come back to each one of those individually. So there's the emergency room doctors. That's a potential. The first one is the insurance adjuster. And then that's a low potential because that's 15%. and then they'll go to the immediate care center, or within that day or the next day or 2 or 3 days, as they have lingering problems. That's kind of what happens. And if they have a GP, and a lot of people don't have a GP, a general practitioner, that's why they'll go to the local immediate care center. And if they do have a GP, that's a smaller percentage. Then they'll go to the GP. Okay. Now, what happens after that flow chart? Where do they go next? Well, they'll typically still have problems. Now, sometimes they'll do a couple different things. They'll go back to the GP, and the GP, they're still having problems. The medications, not working as well, et cetera. The GP will send them to an orthopedist or a physical therapist. So that'll happen also. So we'll talk about the different medical providers also, and how to get referrals from the different medical providers. And again, it's all reverse engineering. You've got to know what their motive is, and then you got to capture it with educational sales. Remember, when I say educational sales, what do I mean versus advertising or publicity? What do I mean? It means you have to establish need as well as minimize the obstacles. Advertising doesn't do that. Publicity doesn't do that. So that's why educational sales is way more powerful. It's way more effective and way more powerful. So do you know how to establish need? Well, we're going to go into how to establish need with the local emergency room doctor. We're going to go into how to establish need. And remember, when we talk about need, we're talking about pleasure and pain-based motives. So there's 5 different types of motives, from present pain, future pain, present pleasure, future pleasure, to curiosity. So we're going to go into that. And it's not totally logic. There still has to be the motivation there. And it's still got to be 80-20 pain versus pleasure. So you can't just go in there and talk about, the 3 phases of healing or logic. You can't do that. Or you can't talk about how chiropractic, research has shown chiropractic is 3 to 1 better for treating low back pain and blah, 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 blah. You can't do that. Okay. So we're going to each one of these individually, the outline, the structure, and how that works. But it's educational sales. You have to establish need. In other words, if you didn't, you'd already be getting the referrals from all of them. And in all the years I've practiced, I've never gotten any referrals because I was a chiropractor. I got referrals from medical providers because of me. They trusted me, not chiropractic. If it was based on the profession, you'd be getting regular referrals from medical providers all the time. So you've got to be able to create them. And I'm going to go into how to do that in each of these categories. Okay, so we're following the flow chart. In other words, this is the flow chart we're going to take for our marketing. We're just going to walk through the flow chart of how this all works, each category. And then we go, so they'll go, there's the medical side, physical therapist, medical, et cetera. We'll go into that. And then typically, so that's kind of where it's at. And as typically as the problem lingers on, and then it's usually what I found, it's a combination of the problem lingering on and the insurance company not being responsive to them. I can't tell you how many patients hired an attorney just because they were pissed at the insurance company was bickering with them about paying for their car or getting transportation or something like that. Something that could have easily been handled. Okay, so then that's when they head off to the attorney. So by the time they get to the attorney, how many people are we talking about? It's a much smaller percentage. Most people don't want to sue. Now, remember, there's 2 different types of personal injury patients. There's the normal working day person. That person typically does not want to sue. They just want to get better. They want their bills paid, and they want to be able to go on with their life. That's the normal person. Then there's another type of person that they're looking to make some money. They want to sue and they're looking to make some money. Okay, so I say there really is a disparity in personal injury from and I'll just give you an example. I had in my office, I had the normal personal injury patients that worked 9 to 5, were responsible. They got in an accident. They just want their car paid for. They wanted their transportation. They didn't want any problems. They want their bills paid. They didn't want any permanent problems. They just wanted to go on with their life. That's definitely one set. Well, I also had a totally different personal injury practice in downtown, in a metropolitan downtown area. Well, that's where you get the really bad patients. That's when you get the patients who aren't working, and that a lot of times they come in smelling like alcohol. You can't get them to come in the morning because they're not getting up in the morning. These are the really bad and the bad motive patients. A lot of times they don't even have problems and they're trying to create problems. So that's a total different type of personal injury patient. So be aware of this. Okay, now I'm not gonna talk about that patient because I wanted nothing to do with that patient. The fake personal injury patient, I wanted nothing to do with. I wanted to deal with real problems. If they had a real problem, fine. If I could help them, fine. Get them back. And there's plenty of business like that to go around. Okay, so having said that, that's kind of the flow chart of where it goes. So we're going to pay attention to the insurance adjuster marketing. We're going to pay attention to the emergency room marketing. We're going to pay attention to the GP marketing. We're going to pay attention to the medical providers marketing and the immediate care center marketing. They all have different angles of what needs to be said to establish need, because that's what you have to do. If you do not establish need, you're not going to get the referrals, period. Or you'd be getting them right now. That's the way that works. So, and then of course, the good thing about the attorney is it's out of all of that. So it's the smaller percentage. There's more people going to the immediate care center, going to their GP. There's way more personal injury patients going over there than to the lawyer, because the vast minority of people are willing to hire a lawyer and sue. That's not the majority. So there's a big market over here, but what's the difference? With the attorney, it's a forced market. They have to have medical bills to sue. They have to. The other providers, they don't need a chiropractor at all. They don't have to refer that person anywhere. A lot of times they don't. So, and that makes a huge difference in your marketing, what type of marketing you do. So if there's no perceived need, you can't use advertising. You can't use publicity. The only marketing that will work is educational sales. And why? Because it establishes need. It gets them to see why they need to refer to you. Pleasure and pain. Okay. So anyway, having said that, now let's go through the flow chart of what the patient goes now. When patients are asking, now that's the personal injury patient. Now, when a patient's looking for a chiropractor, so we'll go into those individually. But now let's follow the flow chart of when a patient's looking for a chiropractor. What's the first thing they do? Remember, there's 5 reasons why patients will pick a product or service after there's a need. And they're totally different for every type of business. Why somebody will go to a dentist or a chiropractor or go to Home Depot. There's 5 reasons. Now, when they go to a chiropractor, in every industry, trust is always number 1, because it satisfies the second highest need in life, security. That's why it's always number 1 in every industry. So we would always rather go to a provider through a referral, through somebody our mom recommend, our father recommend, our brother, our sister, our friend, our coworkers. We would always, that's always number 1. Well, that's real important to know when it comes to marketing. And then why they go to a chiropractor or brick and mortar. It's not just chiropractor, it's a brick and mortar business. Number 2 is proximity. 75% of the reason people will go to a chiropractor, number 2 is proximity. They're not going to look for a chiropractor if they're in California for a chiropractor in Wisconsin. It doesn't matter if it's free. So it's not money. Number 2 is proximity. Number 3 is money. In other words, are you on my insurance plan? Because they already know they get a discount. They don't have to pay as much if they go to a doctor on their plan. They've been taught that through their major medical insurance. They've been taught that. Now, that's not true with personal injury insurance, but they don't know that. So they still think that's the case. Now that gets to be real important in our marketing. So next we're going to they go after price. So now they're going to go, first they're going to go to a referral. Well, that's going to take a certain amount of them out of the market. They're going to get a referral. Then you come down to the next one, it's location. Then they're going to Google chiropractor location. That's going to take us. So that is certain type of marketing. So follow the flow chart here. Next is the insurance, the cost. That's going to be a specific type of marketing. The fourth reason they'll pick a chiropractor is because of service factors. Like you're open late, or you're open on a Saturday, or you'll see the patient immediately, or you'll bill their insurance for them. Those are called service factors. That's the fourth reason. That's something. Now remember, what's happening to the volume of potential patients as we move down the ladder? It's getting less and less and less. And so what's the fifth reason somebody will pick a chiropractor? And by the way, it's not just a chiropractor, it's an accountant, it's an orthopedist, it's a dentist. The fifth reason is quality. In other words, they're specialized and, they have so many years in practice, they're certified in this, blah, blah, blah. It's quality. Now, what percent of people pick based on quality and service? 3%. And that's why I say you should never market based on quality, because you only have an 8% market, limited by your geographic radius of draw. If you're in a suburb, typically 3 miles is 80% of your business. And you're competing with the other chiropractors. So it'd be silly to market based on quality. It's too small of a number. Same with service factors. It's too small of a number. Okay, so that's the flow chart of where they will go. So following the flow chart, we're going to go into the marketing for each one of them. So again, let's itemize them and let's go into each one. So there's the insurance adjuster, number one. By the way, the phone call to the spouse, right? Remember, that's the first phone call. That's already looking for a referral right there on where to go. So it's going to be the phone call to the family. It's going to be the insurance. And then 15% are going to go to the emergency room. So we're going to pay attention to marketing to each one of these categories. What does it take? What's the most effective marketing in each one of these categories? And then there's the general practitioner. There's the medical providers they may refer them to, like the orthopedist, neurosurgeon, et cetera, even physical therapist. I'll talk about that. And then the immediate care center. And then as things go on, if they're not resolved, a small percent of them will call the attorney. And if you followed your patients, that's what happens. That's exactly what happens. And so there you are. Okay. So is the vast majority of patients coming through the attorney? No. So why do we pay so much attention to the attorney? Because it's a forced market. They have to have a medical provider, number one, and they have to be in the geographic radius of draw of that patient. So you got not much competition, to be honest with you, in your geographic radius of draw to rise above your colleagues to win over the attorney, and the attorney's forced to refer them to you if they're in your geographic radius of draw, and you outshine the other ones in your area. That's called personal injury attorney educational sales presentation. That's what that's called. That's why that just works so well. So having said that, let's go into each of these categories of marketing for the personal injury patient.